Yeah, not a problem. We really just want to get your opinion on the matter.
Cool.
Yeah, so we could start just getting into it. So number
Yeah.
one, what got you into racing?
So I was 10 years old when my parents wanted to find an activity where my siblings and I could do something together, and they wanted it to be competitive. They wanted their girls to do something really competitive, and they got us into go-karting, and I loved it, and I was good at it, and I decided by the time I was 12 that I wanted to figure out how to pursue it professionally, and had no idea how challenging it would be, but I'm glad that I've stuck with it.
Yeah. Could you discuss some of the dangers of professional racing?
Yeah, so I think there are a handful of things that, obvious things that are dangerous about racing. You can crash, there can be fires. I mean, we just saw that Catherine Legg crashed over in Europe and broke her leg, and it's just, these scary things happen. But I think that something that is a little less obvious is that, we have to take it so seriously because we're operating dangerous machines, right? And so I think, on the lower levels of racing, sometimes people might not take practice as seriously or think they might not need all of their safety equipment for practice. And it's like, you're still driving a car really fast, even if you're not actively racing against other people. So there's that. And then there's, just the facts that stuff can break on the car. And, you have to be aware and prepared. And luckily the safety, especially in the NASCAR circuits, has gotten so advanced, and they are really quite safe. But you still, whether you're on the street or on the racetrack, you're operating a very heavy, very dangerous machine, and having that serious approach to it, I think, is really important.
Hmm. So in comparison, what are some of the risks that people don't normally think about while street racing?
Yeah, so I would have to assume, having never street raced myself, that something that's so different about that is that you're in public, right? Like, when I think of
Mm,
street racing, I think of like all the potentially like innocent, passerbyers or people who are around who might get caught up unintentionally. I think there's that. I think that, streets are not built with the protective structures like a safer barrier, like a runoff area. So you have much higher likelihood of real injury. But then also there's all the other property involved that's not meant to be, raced on or run into or that. So I think those are big ones that stick out to me.
mm. Yeah, so you touched about the dangers, but just to get your general opinion, like what do you think about street racing, like the whole industry? What do you think about it?
So I'm not super familiar with the whole industry, but when I think of street racing, a combination of what I've seen in movies and then what I've read in newspapers, I think like I totally get the desire for adrenaline rushes and to push something to the limits and the competition side. But I personally feel that when you're in a public space, when there's so many other risk factors that you may or may not have control over, and you might be endangering other people. I just think it's a little more, the risk reward benefit ratio is a little off to me, and I think that there are significantly more risks than benefits, especially when there are so many resources for people to go experience, high speeds on safe circuits. And since we have those and they are all over Canada, all over the US, all over Europe, you can go to these places that are purpose built for racing. I think that's much safer. And also, as the racer themselves, you have medical team on
Mm,
standby at a racetrack, whereas you wouldn't in street racing. So I think I don't like doing illegal stuff in general. So for me, it's really not appealing. But I think, there's just so much other properly supported activities to get adrenaline in, whether it's go-karting or cars. There's a lot out there.
yeah, so you already touched a little bit about the safety equipment, but I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about like what sort of safety equipment do you use while racing in like the Pinty series? And I know I think you race a few other series, right?
Yeah,
Um,
so I raced in
yeah.
Formula Car and in various levels within the minor leagues of NASCAR.
Mm,
And our race cars are purpose built to be able to absorb the energy of a crash. And I think a lot of people don't think about that as much. the cars look like they crumble so much when you crash because that metal and the body and everything is absorbing the kinetic energy of the crash so that the driver doesn't. So that's one thing. And then also in the cars, we have 5 or 6 point seat belts. Our seats are these big steel contraptions that wrap around us. We have a neck restraint so that we don't get whiplash. There's a roll cage so that if you flip, you don't hit your head. And then there are fire extinguishers and emergency shutoff buttons if there's a fire. And then the racetracks themselves, the National Series NASCAR tracks, they have safer barriers, which is where it's instead of just hitting an outside wall that's concrete, they have the concrete wall, but then in front of it is really dense foam and then steel, and so that also absorbs the energy. So a lot of thought is put into how to make the cars and the racetracks as safe as possible, which makes me feel a lot better because it is a really dangerous sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you talked about the track and the cars and how safe those are. But obviously, when it comes to street racing, these people are racing in environments that could be snowing, or it could be raining, or there could be potholes. So could you talk a little bit about the difference between the road surface that you drive on in the series that you do compared to like street racers, what they drive on, like regular roads?
Yeah, I mean, and on the one hand, it's like it's all asphalt, right? But on the other hand, a racetrack is built with specific parameters, and if it gets maintenance, and if there are holes in it, it gets fixed, and there are restraints on the track, and on the road, there's just not. So I think the scariest thing in any kind of high speed activity is to encounter something that's unexpected, right? You encounter a bump in the road, or there's a hole, or specifically with street racing, there's so many things that are hidden, or maybe you hit a part of the street that's a different material and there's a different amount of grip on it, and so it seems very dangerous without the proper precautions and boundaries to be able to protect you against that, and so it just increases the risk again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of these street racers, they think that like they're sort of like inevitable. Like they think that they're not going to get in an accident, right? Because they believe that they're like very highly trained when obviously they haven't been trained. So a lot of things that we try to stress is that like in like Fast and Furious and in these professional racing industries, these guys are very highly professional. They're highly trained. I mean, so could you talk a little bit about your experience? Like, one, how long have you been racing for?
Yeah, so I mean, all stunt moves and things you see in the movies are by either professional drivers or professional stunt people who have been practiced and really well trained, as you said. And I've been racing for 18 years, and so it's just you cannot replace that kind of seat time. You cannot replace. I've taken driving schools. I took the Skip Barber Racing School. There's a Bondurant school in Arizona that I've taken, and just a lot of different schools just to get the skills, like the hard braking skills, the driving with limited grip on a skid pad, and just you have to then, as a racer, we practice so much, or we race so much and practice so much that we become familiar with a lot of different situations that help us adapt in other adverse situations. And so it I know that people like to, believe that they're really great at something or that they're good enough at something to do it safely. But until you have proper training and lots of practice, that's hard. And then also with street racing, again, there are other moving variables that even if you are really trained, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to stay safe, because there are a lot of things that aren't regulated, that aren't in your control. And so even if you are the best and have the most car control and are awesome, someone else might not be, and then that can negatively affect you. So I think doing that risk assessment is really important, especially when you're younger, because I think, and you see this with younger racers, meaning like in their late teens, there's like a no fear mentality. And once you go through enough hits, once you go through enough crashes, or you realize that you're not invincible, I think it adjusts kind of how much risk you're willing to take.
Yeah. So obviously these guys are very passionate about racing. Like they're passionate about cars. So what advice would you give to them in order to transfer that passion for racing into a safe environment, such as a track? What advice would you give?
Yeah, and I am the first to understand how awesome racing is and how fun it is to go fast and how exhilarating it is to race against other people. But I really do think it's important to do it safely. And so my recommendation would be a couple of different things. So on the most affordable, easiest level, there are go-karting tracks all over the world where you can join a league, you can do it competitively, you can do more advanced go-karts, or you can do just rental go-karts. There's a lot that you can do there. There are also a lot of racing schools, and so I would recommend that people just look up car racing schools or driving courses in their area, and you can go to racetracks and you can get in race cars and you can have an instructor and you can do a lot of laps and practice days. There are some schools where you can pay a little more and be able to look at the data so you can see where you're accelerating really well, where you could brake better. So there's all that stuff. And then there are also, open track days for people to bring their own cars. And I think that's probably the most relevant thing here, because you can, I don't know what all the specs are, but if you have a car that you really love, that you work on, that you build up, you can bring it to the racetrack and drive it there and know that you're doing it in a safe environment, know that there will be people there to help you if something bad happens. And you get to meet a whole lot of other people who love racing and love cars and are going to the track. So it's a really cool environment, and it's, totally legal. So that's always good. So there are so many options out there, and the internet is your friend here. And there's really cool, and you learn stuff, right? You can learn how to become a better driver if you're at these racetracks where there are instructors who can point out, what you're doing well and what you can do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for those of the racers that want to get into the professional industry, you've already experienced that. So you've already got into the professional racing. So how does someone do that? What do they have to do to become a professional racer?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different ways to get involved. There are different grassroots level racing that you can do. You can buy your own race car and work on it and bring it to racetracks. You can rent cars from teams that have it all set up already. It is very expensive, and you need to have those resources or work with partners to try to get the funding to do that. And in terms of making it professionally, so much of that involved in that is networking. But I think, just like anything, doing the homework as to what you need to do, what, licenses you need, but at the end of the day, it's about getting to the track. And so, yeah, there's a lot of options for that all over the world.
Mm. Yeah, so again, I know you said you don't know too much about the whole street racing industry, but we heard that often at these car events and while people are street racing, that like drugs and alcohol may be involved. Do you know if this is the case? And if so, do you have any input on the situation?
I don't know firsthand what substances are involved, but under no circumstance should anyone get behind the wheel of anything if you are anything but sober. Any kind of intoxication is wrong, in my opinion. And I'm pretty cut and dry about that, just because it's not only your life, but it's the lives of people around you. And no matter how great you are, if your mental capacity is compromised, you can't be sure that you're doing everything possible to be safe. And so I really frown down on people who mess with that, because it is so dangerous. It's so dangerous, and it's not fair to people who are doing things properly, I guess.
Yeah. So we did a little bit of research on you, and we watched one of the TED Talks that you did. And you
Yeah.
mentioned how you crashed into a wall and was able to walk away fine. And then you sort of like lost your fear of crashing. So when we're comparing this to like street racing, obviously, how would this same situation be handled on public roads?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could have the same confidence. So with that crash, I remember, I knew that crashing happened up to that point. It just hadn't personally happened to me. And so there's always this kind of like, what if? And on the racetrack, I saw that the car absorbed the energy. Like, it was expensive to put it back together, and that was not pleasant. but that I was physically okay. I was able to walk away and that things were taken care of. I don't know that you necessarily have that same security blanket in crashing street racing, just because, again, there's so many variables. There are different barriers, there are different road constructions, there are different poles. I mean, just takes hitting a pole really hard to do some extreme damage. So I don't know that, if you crash in a street race, like, one, you're gonna have to deal with a lot of damage, and hopefully not to yourself, just to your car. But I don't know that that necessarily means that the next crash will be equally okay.
Hmm. So we've done a few interviews here at Teens in a Drive, and a lot of them being professional racers, and one of them being James Hinchcliffe, a Canadian
Oh,
driver. Yeah, and so we asked him about how if he feels safer on the track going like 300 kilometers an hour, however fast they go, or on the public roads. And funny enough, even though he's been to the hospital and he's had injuries on the track, he says that he still feels safer on the track than on the street. Do you feel the same way as a racer?
100%. I feel so much safer on the racetrack than on the road. And it's a couple reasons. One, again, I know that safety is built into the core of racing. And so that is a lot of research and development and money goes into the safety of the cars and the tracks, and the equipment. But also, way I describe it to people is that when I'm on the racetrack, I can drive offensively, right? I'm there to win. I'm pushing really hard. When I'm on the street, I feel like I have to be very, very defensive because, one, lots of people drive distracted, whether on phones, on phone calls, not paying attention. And our standards for getting a driver's license are pretty low. And so, there's so many varying levels of skills of people on the road. And there are some people who really shouldn't be driving, but they are. And so I just feel like I have to be like constantly scanning everything, making sure that people aren't running red lights, because I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we have a lot of people run red lights, which is really bad. And so, yeah, I feel so much safer on the track, even though crashes might be bigger and more dramatic on the track when they happen. They're also a ton safer.
And talking about safety and on the public road, we wanted to ask, what car do you drive outside of racing, and if there's any reason for that specific choice?
Yeah, so I drive a Volkswagen GTI with a manual transmission. And I will be honest, my parents gifted it to me when I graduated college. They gave me their hand-me-down. They were ready for a new car, and they got me that one. But I love it. I love it because you can put the back seat down, and you actually get quite a bit of front space. But it's also really small and easy to park. And although I'm a race car driver, I'm a terrible parallel parker. So this little car makes it a lot easier. And it's just fun. It's kind of sporty, and low to the ground. So I love it, and I hope I get to keep driving it for a while.
That's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So far, we've interviewed both female and male racers. So we wanted to ask, as a female racer in a male dominated industry, do you feel that this has either benefited you or held you back in any way?
I think being different in any field or industry is both a gift and a curse, kind of a double-edged sword. I think, on the one hand, it's easier to set records. It's easier if you're the first woman to win a race or a championship. That's really cool, and that's been fun to do. But then also, you're kind of under more of a microscope, and I think that bad results, attention is brought to bad results more than it might be for just the average guy racing. And the reality is that sponsorship is hard for everyone, so I don't know necessarily that it's really helped or hurt there. But it's also just the camaraderie with the team. I think sometimes with some teams I've had to work a little harder to show that I'm one of the guys and that we all are there to win, and that to earn the respect so that the team wants to invest all their time and energy in me, like on a deep level. But then once I get that respect, I have found that the team sees kind of some of the biases, and like people still don't want to get beat by the girl. And my spotters have heard other spotters say like, don't let that B word pass you. And like all this really like aggressive language. And so there is still that you have to deal with, but the teams, once they see kind of some of the stuff I have to go through and how hard I work, they are like so loyal, and it's just incredible to get that kind of support and to, you know, work with everyone to try to do the best that we can.
That's great. And finally, going back to more of the street racers, as we're trying to make this campaign and how to convince them to not street race, what do you personally think we could do to change their minds?
I think opening up and showing how fun like racetrack sanctioned events can be. And the other thing, you know, you can, I don't know how fast you can go in street racing and like what that looks like, but you can go so fast on racetracks and you can do it safely, and but it still feels really exhilarating and really scary in like the adrenaline good way, right? So I think promoting resources that show just how, you know, available these on-track experiences are, whether it's to be a passenger or to drive yourself. I think showcasing those resources and show how they're in a lot of different areas can be really helpful.
Finally, if you have time, we have one bonus question we could like to ask you.
Yeah.
So we know you were on the show Survivor, and we wanted to ask your experience on that.
Yeah. It was really real. I mean, like what you see is what you get. And in hindsight, I regret the strategy I used. I didn't tell anyone I went to Stanford because you're playing for $1 million. And I was kind of arrogant. I just thought like, oh, well, why would they give me $1 million if I play really well? So I regret that strategy because I was kind of concealing a big part of myself. And I was a little more quiet than I wanted to be. But the challenges were so much fun. You know, the strategy in the social game is so challenging, and I didn't love that it was fans versus favorites. Because a lot of the challenges, and they edit it differently for TV, but there were a lot of challenges where we really were just so close to being the favorite. So the fact that they all had experience, and here we were like coming in a very, very close second, was just disappointing because you knew that if you were against other new players, we probably would have like totally kicked butt. So I just think it's kind of unfair because it's kind of like, you know, being a backmarker team racing against Hendrick Motorsports. Like you're never gonna be competitive against them, and that's how I felt. So I felt like I was a little cheated, but I'm so glad I did it, and it's brutal though. It is very brutal.
Yeah, so I think that's it for all of the questions that we had here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate what you had to say.
Of course, and thank you for what you do. I appreciate you trying to keep people safe, but still, you know, encouraging, having fun, and doing really cool stuff. So thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully we can make a difference, try to get the street racers off the road. But yeah, thanks for the interview.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.